all. Welcome to the Inkwell Exchange. As usual, I am so happy to have everyone here. You will see this one of our new YouTube exclusives. I am excited that we'll start to see these a little more often. We have, if you're new here, the Inkwell Exchange in a nutshell is a creative platform I am building up to show authors, poets, speakers, screenwriters, audiobook narrators, and their journeys to become creatives, how the business side of the creative world works, and all the lessons that all of these great people have learned along the way. So with that said, I'm going to jump right in with this week's guest. I'm going to let him introduce himself, and then we will jump into a bunch of questions. So go ahead and take it away.
Hi, I am Hanoch McCarty. Now that's a Hebrew name and an Irish name. So if you say them ethnically, it's Hanoch McCarty. So my mother was Jewish, my father was Irish. He was a captain of police detectives in New York City. And so, that's it. I was a social worker in Queens. I became a high school English teacher in New York City, in the inner city, and then I taught out on Long Island. And then I got invited to run a graduate program at Southern Illinois University, which I did. And then I went to get my doctoral degree at UMass. And so I have a doctorate in educational psychology. And then I've recently retired, and then I went for training as an assistive technology specialist, working with special needs children, finding the technology that would help them do better in school. And that's how I got here.
I love that. And I think one of the things that you probably didn't dive into, because it's our best and first question, is you've also written a whole bunch of books. And I want to talk to you specifically about how you started writing, how you got into writing, and then we'll talk a little bit more about like the finished products.
Sure. Well, the very first thing I had published was a poem in high school. I had this incredibly wonderful English teacher, and she took me under her wing and told me that I could be a writer, which I had never thought of, and didn't even believe her. And then she published one of my poems in the literary arts magazine of the high school. And then she had me work as an editor of that. And then I ended up writing some articles for her, and that taught me that I could do that. And then later on, when I became a professor, one of the things they say is you either publish or you perish, because you don't get tenure unless you publish in your field, rather regularly. And so I did that. My very first book is this here, Growing Pains in the Classroom, A Guide to Teachers of Early Adolescence. And in fact, I did all of I'm the third author, but I also did all the cartoons and photographs and all that kind of stuff. And so this was awful lot of fun. We did that, and I didn't know that I could do it. So when I did it, and I said, "Oh, I can do it." And so I then wrote a number of other things. And then I was, when I was at UMass getting my doctoral degree, I became friends with a wonderful, brilliant other doctoral student whose name was Jack Canfield. And we became friends, and we started doing workshops together, and we wrote some things together. And then we were founders of the National Association for Self-Esteem with 40 other people. And then he one day called me and he says, "I have this idea for a book, and I'd like you to be part of that." And I said, "What is that?" He said, "It's going to be called Chicken Soup for the Soul." I said, "Oh my God, you're going to have an ATM machine installed in your house." I mean, that's brilliant. I had no idea what was going to be in the book, but I immediately got it. And so he said, "I want inspirational short stories that have to be true, and send me some, because I know you're a public speaker. You've got to have some of those things." So I said, "Okay." And I sent him 6 of my stories. And if you open up the very first book, which is Chicken Soup with a Soul, you'll find 3 of those stories in that book. So this book was turned down by over 50 publishers. The manuscript was turned down. The largest publisher in the country at that time, the editor didn't send a form letter. She sent an angry letter. Nobody wants to read this kind of inspirational crap. And so, fine. So he kept mailing it out and mailing it out. And the 57th publisher said, I'll publish that. And so Jack Canfield said, well, it's going to sell 1 million copies at least. And the publisher said, everybody thinks that. And so he said, I'll publish 20,000 copies and we'll see what happens. And Jack Canfield was a genius. And he said, no, it's going to sell 1 million copies or more. So the publisher said, that costs me too much money if they don't sell. So Jack Canfield said, I will buy any book that's unsold. Really? Yes. So at any rate, to make a long story even longer, this book actually sold over 1 million copies during the first year that it was published, and it's still almost, I think, still in print, and it's like 20 million copies have been sold of it, and it's huge. So then he started putting up secondary ones, like a second helping Chicken Soup for the Soul, a second helping, a third serving, and then he said, we're going to do a 4th course of Chicken Soup for the Soul, which I'm now hunting for. It's over here somewhere. Oh, here it is. So he said, he called Melody, my wife, and I, and said, would you like to write one of the books? Yes. And so this is what we came out with, Chicken Soup. This, when it was published, from the day it was published until 7 days, it then hit #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, nonfiction. And so that was amazing. And so also, by the way, one of his genius ideas was that each book should adopt a charity and tithe itself for that charity. So Chicken Soup for the Woman's Soul gave many donations to breast cancer research. Chicken Soup for the Adolescent Soul, and so on. So when we were asked to pick a thing, we said, well, if we're going to sell 1 million copies of this book, how many trees are going to be cut down to print those books? And so we called the National Arbor Day Foundation in Lincoln, Nebraska, and they said, weigh the book. And we weighed the book. They had a formula. They said, well, there'll be about 17,000 trees that will be cut down. Okay, we're gonna replant those. Well, it turned out that replanting them, if you do it in large numbers, is very inexpensive. So my wife and I brag, we have planted 1 million trees in the United States just through this book.
Wow.
So, and it has such sweet stories in it. One of our rules for a story is A, it has to be true, B, it has to touch the heart or tickle the funny bone. So if you laugh or if you get goosebumps, we consider it for the book, okay? And there's 101 stories in every one of the books. We read for this book almost 2,000 stories and wrote a bunch too before we picked all the ones for this book. So everything, it's not I'm a genius, it's Jack Canfield and his partner, Mark Victor Hansen, who came up with this series. And that's how we got that.
I am amazed by your story a little bit for a couple reasons. One, you may not know this. There's no reason for you to know this. I also, one of my roots is in poetry as well. And that's how I started writing, was that very same story of in high school, I started writing poems and I loved poetry and fell in love with art and was suggested that I send it into our high school literary magazine. And that was the first time I was ever published in anything either. And then went from poetry to journalism, which is also a little bit of a different path. But I think probably what I'm most interested in from your story is that I talk to a lot of indie authors, and I think one of the things they deal with the most is that rejection piece, right? Is that traditional publishers may not be interested in those stories, or they can't show or have those proof points that say hey, this story is going to sell. I'm confident in it. And some of them just purely lack the confidence that your friend had, right? To say hey, this story is so good, right, that
Yes.
I know it's going to do well.
Yeah.
How
Yes.
would you what would you say to that person who doesn't doesn't have that kind of confidence in their story, or is just looking at, the traditional publishing route and really wants to go that route, but is facing that kind of what do you
Sure.
call it, tsunami of rejection?
But let me just tell you that this textbook, and I've written a number of textbooks, this textbook earned me enough money to buy one sport coat. Okay. Because textbooks do not sell and they do not make money. So then there's two other kinds of books. You can have nonfiction and you can have fiction. I do not write fiction. I don't know how to write fiction. I'm aware of it. I read all the time. I love various authors, but they do a magic that somehow eludes me. So my thing is, how do I reach people to give them some tools that will make their own personal world better, or their world around them better, or the world better? So that's what I'm looking at. And if an author, if somebody wants to be an author, if you allow someone else to say no, they may have a good reason, but they may not see the audience that you see. So you need to first, before you start submitting to publishers, you need to do some research. Go into it. If you can find a real bookstore, go into the area in that bookstore where your book would be if it were published. Take a look at a sampling of those books, read them, and also look who the publisher was and who, if they're thanking, we have to thank Marlene Clone because she was our editor, blah, blah, blah. So then if you're going to submit, don't just write it and send a copy to that publisher, send a copy to Irene Clone at that publisher. And so it gets past the slush pile. And because the slush pile is some undergraduate was hired to read stuff and throw a lot of it away. So, but the other thing is, do you have enough courage to print it yourself? Now, in those days, it was very hard to do anything like that. But today, Amazon does it, where you send in and then they publish it. Our daughter Melody, and our youngest daughter wrote a book, and she's already been published. She published it herself, but you have to start somewhere. So that's my thing, is to look at who your audience is and find one person that you know and write towards that person. If your best friend is Joe Smedley, then you have to say, what would Joe like? And then start writing towards Joe. And so, because Joe represents a large number of other possible readers. So you have to have in your mind a real person. Somebody, by the way, just recently gave me a novel that they wrote. And I'm afraid to see them again because it's so bad. I couldn't go past one chapter because I was just yawning to death. But he published it himself. God bless him. So if it didn't go very far, fine. Ask yourself why it didn't go far, and read, interview some of the readers, see where you need to change. Be willing to change. Be courageous to start, but be willing to change.
No, I think that's a great point. One of the things we talk about a lot on the show is like the art of the pivot. And so a lot of times you have to, as an artist, be open to the opportunity of pivoting. And I think that also brings us to a very poignant point, which is you are often a co-author with other writers. What is that experience like, collaborating on something that is strangely personal, like writing, but also is a part of a larger project?
Yes. Well, let me tell you. My wife and I co-authored on this book, and my wife and I co-authored on this book. We wrote 3 books on kindness. Then we wrote 2 of the chicken soup books. So here's Chicken Soup for the Soul, for the grandparent soul. And here's this, and this is sold almost 1 million copies. And then we have it, by the way, in 57 languages. So it's bouillon de poulet pour l'âme des grands-parents. Yes, I do French. Not a soup, but there it is. So the thing is that we've written 5 books together and had 1 argument.
Wow.
with the very first book. And the argument was the stupidest argument on the planet Earth. I wanted my name to be first on the list of authors. And you know what we did? We're going to write more books together. We said every other book. Who goes first is every other book. Who cares? Okay. So one of the things is you have to get past your ego. And you have to say, like, so when we were putting one of these books together and writing stories and so on, we would be saying, we'd write down a whole bunch of possible chapter ideas. And then we would say, who wants to try to write this chapter? So we would check, and sometimes both of us wanted to write that chapter. So we both write that chapter separately and then see how they combine. So what we did, that method of writing, now I don't say everybody else should use it, but in our case, it maximized the strength and the power of both of our talents. It didn't say that only one of us has to be well, actually, my wife taught me this. This is the only place I'll ever be king, is in my teacup. But you have to get past that stuff and just say, who am I trying to communicate with? What needs do they have? You see, as we're writing stuff for dealing with special needs children, we're looking at what does the parent need to help that parent help his or her child, and then what does that child need, and what obstacles are they facing? And so we focus ourselves by looking at our audience's needs, not our need to sell an idea, but their need to solve a problem or a set of problems. And so that's our particular focus.
I think that works really well. And sometimes I think working toward, even if you're not co-authoring, that focus on what your audience needs or would want, or the questions they would ask, is super helpful, not only in nonfiction and textbook writing, but also in creative writing. We've had a couple of like urban fantasy authors and fantasy romance authors on recently. And one of the things that I learned from those conversations was the importance of even caring about what your reader would want to see for your characters, and then how that fits with the character you've built. So I completely agree with that. And I think this is also a lovely segue into my next question, which is, you've written your nonfiction stories such as Chicken Noodle Soup, but also like crossed over into textbook writing. How does your writing process differ between like your technical and kind of non-technical writings?
Well, number one, I'm never going to write another textbook. I still have that sport jacket that one book earned for me. But, if you're going to put a lot of energy into writing something, you have to say, what is it going to produce for the world, and what is it going to produce for me? And by the way, I've written a number of textbooks. Here's one called Motivating Your Audience, Speaking from the Heart. Now, the Toastmasters International recommends this book. I can't believe that they did that. I mean, so we've written, a bunch of textbooks already. But I like to try to, and if I'm thinking of writing something, who can I help with this? How can I make a dent in the world? The world is filled with some sadness. It's filled with violence. It's hard to watch the news right now. It's filled with people who generate self-doubt deliberately. I mean, all kinds of stuff like that. So we're like Sisyphus. We're pushing a big stone up the hill, and we've got to keep pushing that thing. I would also throw in a little side thing, which is write something every day, but don't write 4,000 words today. That if you set that as your goal, you're going to stop yourself, and you'll never finish what you're doing. Hemingway had a rule for himself. His rule was to write 1 page a day that he could be happy with. And then if he wrote more than that, great. If not, he went out and had a drink or went fishing. So say to yourself, 1 page of typing, 250 words. How much can I write in one day? I'll write 2 pages of type stuff. And then if you write more than that, fine. And my other advice is put it away, print it out, put it in a file in a drawer, and don't reread it. Don't be an editor for at least 2 weeks, because you don't have any distance from it. When you open it up after 2 weeks, you go, "Oh my God, did I say that?" And there's a segue needed between this chapter and that. You see what I'm saying? So write something, and then put it away for a little bit, and then write something else. And if you throw something you've written every single day into a folder, at the end of a year, you got a book.
Yeah, that's so true. That's very true. I think one of my least known facts maybe is that I tend to write, I write a lot of poetry, but I've had the same book that I write my poetry in, at least the first drafts, all live in one book that I've had since high school. And it's crazy sometimes to look back, because that's my go-to place. Sometimes I look back and I won't remember having written that stuff. And I'll be like,
Yeah.
oh, those are some good couple of lines. Or, I knew that wasn't finished, but, I just jotted it down because it seemed cute or fun or whatever. And there's nothing more magical than looking back at something like I wrote 6 months ago or a year ago, and being like, that is such a beautiful verse, or I don't quite remember what I was feeling there, but that feels like it needs expansion.
Right.
And I always have fun looking back.
But I would say to you, be a loving critic of your work.
Yes.
Not a critic of your work. Be a loving critic of your work.
Yeah.
Don't say, "Oh, this sucks," and blah blah, because then you're going to say, "I'm a lousy writer." No, you're somebody. We're all learning. All right.
Yeah.
Carl Rogers, great humanistic psychologist, said, "Look in the mirror and see a person in progress."
I love that. I love that. I think that's very beautiful. And I think I will actually then recommend to people, alongside your recommendation of writing every day, if you can write on paper and pick different colors for every day. Because I think one of the things I love the most is when you can go back to a page and see growth. Because I'll go back and see that I crossed something out or edited or changed a word in different colors, and it makes me feel good. Even if it was from 6 months ago and today I'm using orange and then I used blue, right? That kind of, or I'll see a color or a day that had 6 different colors on it, right? So I've come back to that piece time and time again.
See, that's joyous. See, now I have 2 little aids here. I have a little to-do list thing. This is commercially made. I get them from Staples, and then I put a date on it, and I write the ideas that I'm getting down, because I might not be in a place where I can do something extensive, but I can write a little note to myself, and then later on I can say, "Oh, I want to write about that." But here's my secret now. This is my secret weapon. Okay? Because you can dictate while you're driving.
Yep.
You have a wonderful idea, but you're in traffic. You can't write a darn thing, but you just set it up. So you just say, "Okay, let's go to this." You use an app, whatever app works for you, and you just pick it up and just start dictating. This is what I want to do. Here's the little side thing that could happen. I should call my friend Charlie because he's got some insight about that. My secret weapon.
I love that. I love that so much. You even mentioned your background in psychology. How this is our second to last question, so I'm very excited. How do you kind of use your background in psychology to inform your writing, not only in your textbooks, but across all your different types of writing?
Ooh, that's a hard thing, because there's so much to that. There's so many different phases of it. I mean, I live with my teacher. I happened to marry the queen of all things. I was very lucky. And she made me court jester and said, as long as I keep her laughing, she'd feed me. And that's worked for 33 years. So, when I retired from doing public speaking, which I did a lot of public speaking, and then I retired from it. And after about a year, she said, you're just lost, honey. And there's so much you can do. And I said, like what? And she said, well, you've built a dozen computers from parts. And there's a field called assistive technology, which I'd not heard of. And I said, what is that? She says, well, it's you get trained and certified, and then you can go assess children who have special needs and then find the specific technology that would help them do better in school. So I went and I got certified, and I spent 5 years visiting schools and working with kids with the most incredible set of needs that could just break your heart unless you're there because you can make a difference for a kid. I had a kid with CP, and he was in a motorized wheelchair, and he was a brilliant, brilliant kid. But he had some things that he couldn't accomplish because of his physical limitations. And one day I got some technology for him, and he tried it a little bit in front of me, and he looked up and he said one word: awesome. I felt like I got the Nobel Prize that day.
Yeah.
And now that kid, a few years later, he's on a full ride scholarship at a university, and because he's figured stuff out, and I opened that up for him. But all of his success is not mine. All of his success is his. All I did was take the gate away.
Yeah.
Teachers, you see, whether you're a teacher in a school, but we all have a function of teaching somebody. And you have a choice of two ways to be. Will you be a gatekeeper? Well, I'm not going to let him go on to that until he passes test 42. Or can you be a gate opener? Can you make it possible for someone to get past the obstacles? I choose to be a gate opener.
I love
I
that.
think that's the purpose of my writing.
I love that. So I think that's the perfect move into our very last question, which is, you've had such a long career. You've had an illustrious career. It's had twists, it's turned. It's really an amazing thing to be able to even kind of have this conversation. So then my question to you is, for people who are starting off, because a lot of our viewers are either indie writers early in their career, maybe kind of mid in their career, having published just a couple of books that they're hoping to kind of build audiences for. What would you say to kind of either your younger self or them at that point in their career, on how to continue forward, how to continue kind of pushing that rock up a hill?
Yeah. Well, it's the answer to that is going to be so different for each and every person you meet. But the thing is that you have to look at who your audience is going to be, because you're not just writing, you're writing for an audience. Now, maybe that audience doesn't know you yet. Maybe they haven't purchased your book because you haven't written it yet, but you're writing for an audience. And what you got to get clear on is who your audience is, because many people are writing and they have no idea who they think might read it or might want to read it. That's when I go back to Barnes and Noble and I go to that set of shelves where the book that if I were going to write it would be, and then I take a half a dozen of those books over to one of the chairs on the table, and I look in there and I take a look at who the publisher is, and what's the foreword. Most people write a foreword or a dedication, and what you see, who are they writing to? Okay, well, these are the people who are writing the book that I want to write too. I want to write one that's a little more of this or a little less of that, or in a new direction. You've got to know your audience. If you really spend some time looking at who your audience is, that means you're going to spend some time reading stuff that other people are writing in that area. And so you're going to be teaching yourself, and that's part of it. If you're not open to learning yourself, nobody's going to want to read your book.
I love that. I love that. I think that's the perfect closer. Thank you so much for joining me. I really, really appreciate it. I want to thank everyone for viewing the Inkwell Exchange, and keep an eye out for all of our new episodes that are going to continue to come. This is a YouTube exclusive, so you may see a couple clips on Instagram, but this is the only place you'll actually see the full interview. And I cannot wait to get back to you with more of these. So I'm going to wish you a happy, hopefully holidays, hoping to get this out before the end of the year. And then wishing you all a good time with your family during this time. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you for inviting me.
Of course. I'm so glad that you made the time to be here. All right. Have a great day, everyone. Bye bye.